Welcome to Black Lodge Publishing's series of short introductory talks on esoteric and other occult subjects. Welcome to the second of 4 short talks on alchemy and the Thoth Tarot. In this talk, I want to engage the practitioner with some things shared by both practices, and in particular, I want to ask the question, how does one creatively combine energies from alchemy and the tarot? In my first talk, I pointed out that alchemy had been viewed by some as a proto-chemistry, whilst others use its themes for occult study and artwork, or that its tenets have been regarded theosophically, philosophically, or indeed altered to fit a series of psychological processes. Yet, nevertheless, from my own studies and work, I have learned that alchemia, like the tarot, involves both theory and practice, and this can lead the magical practitioner through several processes, and which result in considerable transformation of both materia and indeed the practitioner themselves. When someone asks me what the purpose of alchemy is, and how one can begin in its study, my answer is that they should engage not only the corporeal or phenomenal, but also in that of the noumenal level, and whereby they can discover how to manipulate certain occult energies. And thus, by gazing into the riddles of physis, nature, the initiate can unlock the dunamis, the powers, that are hidden in both plant and mineral structures. For it is through these occult powers, and indeed in the work carried out on certain occult materia, that we can gain information which can readily be transferred to the study and practice of many other esoteric subjects, including that of tarot, and from which we discover that not unlike digging into alchemy's mons philosophorum, the philosophical mountain, and participation in the golden game, one can then begin to unravel the initiatory structure of one's entire journey, and this can lead the initiate to the mastery of greater self-knowledge, hence gnosis. To begin a study of the tarot, I usually suggest to students that a useful modern construct, and one that provides a general aid memoir in the magical arts, and one that has featured as a central symbol for many initiatory orders, and which subsequently led many a student to obtain that of a much clearer understanding of the structural significance of the 78 tarot designs. This information is provided in that primal glyph and framework known as the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, or Etz Chaim. For in general, the glyph schema is demonstrated by that of a downward emanatory or downward bolt of current, otherwise in Greek that termed katabasis, or emanation of the mind-soul's descent into matter, that is, in the powers represented on the tree, from 1 through to 10. Or glyphed by the ace to 10, and thence by way of the practitioner's return pathway by magically activating the Ophidian current within, and then anabasis, which signifies the mind-soul's return journey back to the one. For this journey, when understood by the pathways on the tree, allows the practitioner to unlock through certain more enigmatic alchemical mysteries hidden within the initiatory paths, and which are clearly associated with the practice and activation through magic. I would also therefore strongly recommend the listener to analyse the glyph's initiatory function and significance as described in relation to that of magic, alchemy, and as we will see, the Thoth Tarot. All of this I have discussed in my book, The Night of Pan. Listeners to our previous lectures on Nox Pan and the Typhonian Atavism series will be aware that the dispersed husks that are originally associated with the shattered vessels of the subconscious Qliphoth go to providing new areas for creative thinking by initiates, and which through the study and cleansing thereof, only then can they be creatively manipulated. These are therefore the stems or initiatory roots which point upwards on the arbor philosophorum or philosopher's tree. This is glyphed in the form of the Ophidian or serpent power as it unfurls its coils and begins to climb the 22 branches seen as paths that link the Sephirotic system on the Tree of Life. The system is glyphed by 10 vessels, ace to 10, and which are then linked by a series of initiatory paths, glyphed by the 22 Atu, or trumps of the tarot. The Tree of Life, Etz Chaim, is sometimes wrongly identified as that of the Tree of Knowledge, Etz Hadath. This, however, is not totally wrong, considering the Ophidian current can be activated from either top down or bottom up, and the current was originally projected downwards, catabasis, and into the shattered vessels, and thence by magic and a structural use of our memories can then be activated, and which provides for the return journey or anabasis. To achieve this, we can use the tarot, and which by magically activating or using the iconography and glyphs provided on the Atu, and whereby the Ophidian line is drawn down and then invoked, and which can then point the way to what in alchemical terms we can refer to, and this is the important point, the manufacture of the universal alchemist or the elixir of life. This can only be created from the red and white glutens. The student would do well to understand that alchemy and the tarot abound in occult glyphs and iconography, in which the practitioner must firstly decode and then learn how to unify both nominally, that is by manipulating colours and the phenomena as designed on the tarot cards. Thus, by using the mind's eye in hand, we find in both alchemy and tarot, we can refer this process to that known as conjunctio, or the celestial and terrestrial union which takes place through the hieros gamos, and as such, as we see demonstrated in the performance of Liber 15, otherwise the Gnostic Mass. However, a warning to students activating the current in that one should be very aware of the various decknamen, that is coded terms, used by initiates in both alchemy and the tarot. For indeed, we find coded terms being used in general throughout most forms of esotericism and occult studies, and even more so when referring to actual praxis. Yet in saying this, don't be fooled by the use of these decknamen, for they possess genuine magical and alchemical significance. As such, a glyph like any other, we find that the Tree of Life brings together the values we represent as such in alchemy, that which we also refer to as our lapis philosophorum, or philosopher's stone, and also in magic by way of analogy through invocation and initiation along the paths on the tree, and whereby we can further achieve identification and reunification through the central vessel of Tifereth, beauty. And thence by adeptly crossing through the veil of the abyss, we then strive to conquer dispersion and our ego consciousness to reach the true sea or palace of understanding, that is Binah as Magister Templi, on the way to wisdom as Chokhmah, becoming a Magus, and which can then lead to that of the one true crown of Kether as Ipsissimus. For this journey, the student of tarot will initially need to purify those subconscious atavisms, as indeed so does the alchemist, who must discover and cleanse the materia prima. For indeed, and as I have hinted, the occult roots of both subjectio can be found in the original Kabbalistic husks, which lie hidden in the foundation of Yesod, and that glyphed deep within the tree of knowledge. Etz Hadath, that is deep within the original layer of the subconscious. Magically manipulated, this is perhaps more familiar from those who understand the dark entities which are represented through nightside visions, otherwise seen in those associated with the dark dynasties of ancient Egypt. These are primarily a reworking of the entities represented beneath the tide of the Egyptian Duat, otherwise At Keki, the Chamber of Darkness, and the Shetit, or the Beyond. For it is here, at this level, that the practitioner must esoterically learn to purify those clifothic husks, achieved by creatively manipulating the magical, alchemical, and hidden significance of those glyphed at the root of the tarot and alchemy, and which is signified by the materia prima, described metaphorically as that of a downward tending darkness, hence its various decknamen, and from which the starry cosmos is produced by that of a primordial genesis as that of a coming into being vis-a-vis cosmic duality and corporeality, and through which, in alchemy, we must discover, manipulate, separate and unify the materia prima. This practice we describe as a form of celestial agriculture, and which entails the operation of the sun as glyphed as a dot within a circle. Simultaneously, this double current, e.g. energia, energies entwined as solar and lunar, and their creative dynamis, the powers, are represented through the phenomenon of birth, life, death and rebirth. This is captured both in reality and metaphorically through a series of inextricable relations. But as a whole, every part is in the same sense actively alive. This interpretation is close to the way that we have merely reinvented our own understanding of the Hermetic principle, and whereby on a corporeal, biochemical level, life can be identified and unified through system thinking, noesis, using several categories of relations, diversity, and indeed that of their context. Furthermore, we find on the corporeal level we can discover that those Platonic parts, as indeed the wholes, can be represented fractally, although I would hasten to add that the mind and soul have implicit roles to play here. Yet, nonetheless, the reality and truth about the human condition and its limits can in fact be found in the non-fulfillment of the magnum opus, that is, in the sheer impossibility to fully reach true knowledge, ultimate gnosis, but merely in that of our perceived illusion of this golden game, and which, it is said by some to accompany one's actual discoveries along the way. I believe that this is cleverly glyphed by Crowley as a series of question and exclamation marks. That is, as the student is initiated and makes their way in that of the great work. Thus, we question and then eventually we discover. The eureka moment, sometimes short-lived as it can be, but does nonetheless indeed function as part of our true initiation. Nevertheless, part of the truth in all of this can be found by continually renewing one's will and the desire to overcome those seeming boundaries, and indeed we can extend beyond the periphery, and thus whereby one can learn to create even greater structures. Alchemically, it must begin by firstly discovering what the materia prima actually is. That is, glyphed magically as a point within the circle, or that substance which literally lies hidden in the depths of the mons philosophicum, and wherein one must engage in the tenebrosum or darkness of the massa confusa, the deep confused mass deep within the subconscious. This is indeed dark stuff. Today, some might prefer to see in this a metaphor describing that of a great development, especially in that of science. This time glyphed through information transfer and intercommunication, and where what is perceived as knowledge transfer becomes the basis for scientific progress, and also the progress of civilization in general. Yet, however, this raises a puzzle in that how can we overcome any simplistic way in dealing only with the phenomenal, and which might bar the way to achieving that of a more universal noumenal knowledge? The answer is surely that we can only achieve this through an ordered form of scientific illuminism, and that along with the use of a more creative form of esotericism. Indeed, I see in this creative esotericism not only as that being glyphed through the discovery and use of the Ophidian current, but through the activation of the tantric fire serpent or kundalini and chakra activation, but we should also include other forms of meditative and creative praxis. What I am proposing is that solitary practitioners need to develop a sound philosophical and magical overview. By this I mean that you must begin by questioning your understanding of the bigger picture, and then one begins to ask those more difficult questions as such about the one, the mind, the soul, life, and the corruption of the body. For indeed these questions are themselves central to that of your great work. That is, until you can activate and then synthesize several different approaches to self-initiation. That is through the likes of magic and alchemy. And more specifically, from these lectures, one can begin to evoke in oneself an understanding of how it is through participation in the great work. The Thoth Tarot can also provide that of an alchemical gateway, and which can then be used for the transformative activities involving the manipulation of the Ophidian current. For the current is indeed cyclic, and where we find it being neatly represented iconographically in alchemy by the Ouroboros or tail eater. It also extends to the tarot as that of a great perichoresis or circular cosmic dance. Thus the original premise that lies behind all of my own work is based on methods of transformation, and whereby I found the major atu of the Thoth Tarot most useful in the preparation and writing of the Knight of Pan. For in this book I relate much occult theory and practice, and especially in that of using the Tree of Life as a central glyph, and from which one can activate the current and then follow its initiatory line of influence. What I'm suggesting is that one must, by participation in the great work itself, learn to invoke the current's creative dynamis through a series of energetic transformative processes. Thus, esoterically speaking, we might for example take the Red Emperor, Atu 4, to represent sulphur in the soul, the Empress, Atu 3, to represent salt in the body, the Magus, Atu 1, to represent Mercury, the mind, and the Art Atu 14 to represent the fusion of materia found in the alchemical motto vitriol. Even the Lovers, Atu 6, represents the divine spirit, which disposes the higher intelligences of the cosmic or the cosmos upon the adept by giving them inspiration, especially to those who align themselves through their own will. That is, to those who have followed the initiatory paths that lead to the unification with the true self. Despite the dualism and temptation of egoism in the form of Corazon, the great daimon of dispersion, and whereby one's guardian can be used to protect the adept by imbibing in them such higher knowledge on the way to the supernals. Another method that one can use to interact more directly with the magical use of the tarot in alchemy can be found in the deconstruction of the function and movement of the mind-soul through the union of dayside consciousness with that of the nightside subconscious. In Egyptian texts, this is glyphed by the Mehen serpent bark that protects and carries the mind-soul Akba, and which glides on the duatic tides of the subconscious, and which is then reunified with the body, Kat, during the deep hours of sleep. Yet again, we see in this ancient noumenal process, that of a separatio and then conjunctio, the alchemical processes demonstrate not only in materia, but also in the glyphs of philosophical mercury, sulphur and salt, thus representing the mind, soul and body. Praxis confirms that all of this is associated with the activation of the Ophidian current. Note how it is through Heka, magic, who can be seen at the back of the boat, who it is who activates the protective Ophidian Mehen serpent around the great Ak, mind and Ba, soul of Ra, for the journey into the netherworld. And note well, this also represents our own nightside journey and indeed one's final transformation into that of a glorious star, Seba. I have now provided certain veiled references or deknamen and instruction in this video, but more can be found relating to this whole magical process in my alchemical books and the Flesh of Ra and Chamber of Darkness, especially and to that concerning how by using certain ancient magical exercises can lead to the activation of the Ophidian current, and in particular to that of scrying, and which will be the subject and conclusion to my Egyptian-based Typhonian trilogy to be published next year. Therefore, as an alchemist or magician, we're not unlike consummate artists, for what we seek is to engage in that of a creative approach and participation in the great work. This is where we find that the one, or absolute non-manifest, developed consciousness as the need to be, and from which life and matter developed in order for us to evolve. Consciousness is therefore the need to be of the absolute. So in order to satisfy this need, consciousness created life and life created matter in order to involve and to experience, thus to be fully realized. For that which is above is like that which is below is like that which is above, for the perfection of the one true thing. For we also see in that of the emanationary process from Ein Sof Ur, to Kether, that in order to become manifest, the one must by necessity become two, thus from monism to dualism. In alchemy, we see this described as the active, volatile, and passive fixed forces that are developed from out of the Materia Prima. That is for the alchemist's own hand and mind. It can also be seen in the numbering of the tarot as they emanate and extend from Kether, that is, the zero full Atu, the Magus 1, the High Priestess 2. All three are therefore transfigured from out of Ein and Kether as the one reflects on itself. It's also neatly glyphed by the full and final Atu, the universe, from where the practitioner must begin their journey. However, this is viewed as a circulatoria and merely reflects on the initiatory paths and grades leading from 10 to 1 and 1 to 10. In alchemy, all of this theoria leads to our praxis and the search for what is more casually called the Philosopher's Stone, or better Lapis Philosophorum. This has been described as a secret substance which is not only capable of changing common metals into silver or gold, but can also prevent aging through its rejuvenative power and thus affecting longevity. We find in the stone's latter description that which is more especially applied in Eastern alchemy to that of a conceptual bridge used to define immortality, but in the West is achieved through that of a transformative substance termed variously as a lapis, a gum, a liquid, or a powder, or that better known by the term alchist, philosophical mercury, or even simply Mercurius. So now, and as I hope you are becoming more aware, alchemy, and as we will see in the following lectures, the tarot not only deal with inherent memory, but they can also aid in one's creative development and understanding of those things that are contained deep within the subconscious strata, and which consciousness is sometimes only very dimly aware. Thus, through the awakening of magical praxis, we not only seek to purify, but also restore these or those deep-rooted duatic shells. And through alchemy, we also seek to discover in actual physical minds the materia prima, and from which we can then engage in the alchemical processes of purificatio in order to produce corporeal seeds and an elixir. From this we come to understand that the incorporeals, the noumena, can therefore be creatively projected into corporeal phenomena form. And yet what the alchemist and skilled tarot practitioner has come to understand is that these processes can indeed be reversed, and where we operate firstly on the material nature, fuses, elements, glyphs in iconography, etc., and where the matrix which binds the mind and soul, albeit for a short time, to the elemental body, can then be investigated and then purified. This is neatly summed up through the living nature and corporeality of the four elements, otherwise the tetrastoichia, which are activated by that of the quintessence or fifth element, spirit. The astute listener will be aware that I do not use the term spirit as one of an incorporeal, but as that of a corporeal essential element, stoichion. I prefer keeping to the original incorporeal terms mind and soul, and whereas the body remains that of a purely corporeal substance. Thus I use the Egyptian designations and hieroglyphs of the Akba and Kat, that is the mind, soul and body, or the later Greek Hermetical philosophical terms nous, mind, psyche, soul, and soma, body. Therefore I take spirit, as in the Greek pneuma, a wind, breath or ether, as the fifth element, and whose job it is to activate the other four stoichia. If you pause the video here and look at the central figure of the alchemist, who in fact represents the union of forces or dynamis, and who in fact stands between fire, air, water and earth, and also sol et luna, and the mineral trees which are necessary for actual alchemical praxis, these then lead to the 5 alchemical stages, that is glyphed by a raven, swan, basilic, pelican, and a phoenix. Also note well the circulatorium of the heavenly spheres and planets and zodiac, from which the tria prima and hieroglyphic monads centred within, which we find the seed or dot. As I hope you will observe, there is much common ground between this alchemical diagram and the glyphs, and indeed iconography of the Thoth Tarot. Unfortunately, we have insufficient time to explore and explain these in greater detail. However, I'll leave it to the industrious listener to make their own magical connections and conclusions. Many thanks, and I hope you will subscribe and like Black Lodge Publishing on Facebook and here on YouTube. Next time, I'll be focusing more on the magical use of the tarot and further alchemical themes.